Scobie is a mental health speaker, podcaster, and author who has turned her lived experience with bipolar disorder into a powerful platform for change. From battling self-stigma as a young adult to working at the very hospital where she was once a patient, Paris has a unique perspective that's deeply rooted in empathy and advocacy as she works to break down barriers of mental health stigma. Thank you so much, Paris Scobie, for joining me here in AwareNow to share this space and to share your story. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I cannot wait to dive into all the things with you today and really shed some more light on a topic that we were saying, isn't really talked about as often, that isn't explored as deeply as it should be. So I am so excited to share my story to really help make an impact for other people.
Awesome. Well, let's get right into it, and let's start this way. Let's start with your journey. Your journey with the diagnosis of bipolar took you from patient to advocate. So I'd like to talk specifically about 2 days. What were you thinking and feeling on the day you received your diagnosis? And then let's fast forward. Please then to share the details about the day when you decided to use your diagnosis to help others.
Yeah, so I remember the day that I received my diagnosis, I felt a mixture of different things. I felt relief, I felt fear, I felt slightly hopeful, but I was more overpowered by the negative feelings of, what do I do with this? This isn't good. This is a label. There's stigma that comes with this. And I just got this rush of emotions of remembering all of the TV shows, the movies, any instances I've ever heard the words bipolar. I realized it was never positive. I realized there was never anyone that I actually knew in real life who was living with this diagnosis other than celebrities that you can go on and Google and type in this person bipolar, and you see articles, you see videos, and it's usually not good things that are being discussed. So I felt a lot of that. And that was at 19 years old. So I was taken to a psychiatric facility, and then I was transferred to a hospital where I was there for 2 weeks was the minimum amount of stay. And then I was placed on court-ordered treatment. For people who don't know what that is, there's court-ordered evaluation where they have you go before a judge, and they basically evaluate you to make sure, is this person able to be released? What's the situation, right? Do they need to stay? Do they need medical attention? And so I was placed on court-ordered treatment, and I was diagnosed with SMI bipolar. So SMI stands for severe mental illness. So that was the diagnosis, and it was a lot to take in, right? I mean, 19 is pretty young age. I had been struggling with my mental health as early as 12 years old. I was actually diagnosed with major depression at 16. So I used to, and really, view it as a misdiagnosis, right? Because I was put on a lot of different medications that I thought would be helpful. But I know that I was not ready to do the work at the time. I did not know how to express my experiences. I did not know how to talk about the traumas that I faced from a young age. I just felt really stuck, and I felt really alone. And really, that's like an experience I've heard from so many people, is they feel those things when in reality, it's not that way. But our brain does a really good job of convincing us that we're alone in this. We can't talk about it. It's going to follow you forever. So that's how I felt from the initial diagnosis. And then I was released from the hospital, came home, and I didn't have any tools. That was the problem. I thought going in there, I was going to leave with some kind of a plan, maybe something, right? And I remember I actually was the one who did all the work on my own. I didn't really do this until much later in life. So that was 19. So 19, 20, 21, 22, and then 5 years later is when I made that commitment to myself, and I dove into the field of advocacy. So it's actually pretty well illustrated on the cover of my book here. So you'll see there's 3 doors. So this symbolizes my journey from being a patient, and then being a provider working in the same psychiatric facility that I was a patient at, and then getting into advocacy, which is what I do today through my podcast, through my story, and through speaking. So it's those big 3 phases of how I was feeling and what I was doing with that. So that was a lot of the patient insight. So I felt a lot of those feelings of, being overpowered, feeling overwhelmed, not knowing what to do. And then I even went back and, like I said, I worked at the same exact place. And I was so excited. I was like, this is going to be awesome. I can finally help people who've struggled in similar ways to the ways I have. I can make a difference. But really, I wasn't able to do any of that because I was still overpowered with the shame, with the fear, the isolation, that it really held me back. And it made me think, how am I ever going to get over this? How am I ever going to do this? And I just forced myself. I started making little videos and just slowly talking about what I was comfortable with. I started talking about my experiences in therapy, my experiences in medication. And then I revealed that I had a hospitalization, survived a suicide attempt, sexual assault, and bipolar 1 diagnosis. And then it blossomed into me starting the podcast, which was 4 years ago. So that was January 31st of 2020. I had no idea what I was doing. I was in the back of my parents' yard, walking with my phone in my hand. You can hear rocks crunching in the background, and I'm talking into my phone. And I was recording my first episode. And then I was like, you need to name this. You need to name your podcast. You need to have a logo. I didn't know any of that. And I figured it out in that moment. I was like, I'm going to call this the Crooked Illness Podcast, because that was my book that I was working on. And I said, I'm going to call this episode The Relationship Between Mental and Physical Health. And I'm just going to share it because someone needs to hear it. I know I needed to get to work, but that's kind of the progression of how this took place over the years.
Mm-hmm. Well, what an incredible journey it's been, and no doubt will continue to be. Going back I want to go back to the hospital, going back to work at the hospital where you were once a patient. How did that feel? Like, I imagine it gave you a whole new outlook on mental health care. And I guess, how did it shape the way you connect with others who are in that place right now?
Yeah. So really how I felt, and I'm so descriptive in the book. Like, you literally feel like someone sent me a voice note the other day and she's like, I feel like I'm with you. Like, I feel like I'm walking next to you in the hallways. And she's like, I had to put it down for a second to kind of take it all in. But I talk about it. I talk about going in there. And, I had multiple interviews after graduating from school. And that was always something I did, is I loved learning. Even though I was going through all these struggles, I just loved learning, and I just really, really wanted to connect with people. But that's kind of what kept me going, is like, I just know I'm here for something. I don't know what it is. I had no idea, but maybe I'll figure it out. So I remember going back to that, and I remember I did the interview, and I was told that I was selected to be employed there, and I was excited and nervous. And I just remember feeling like, okay, this is a step in the right direction. I can use what I've gone through, but I know now that I wasn't fully ready because I didn't give myself fully the opportunity to heal a lot of the pain and things I'd gone through. I knew, and that's how I feel like I've always been, is I want to listen to people's stories. I want to hear your journey. I want to help, but I neglected myself. I neglected to give myself that same opportunity. So I didn't get that opportunity until I was a year later. So I ended up actually going back to school and deciding to go and get my MBA in healthcare administration. So I ended up doing that. And then COVID hit, actually. So COVID came and hit, and then everything changed. Life, all the things that we typically do, everything kind of been put on pause. So that's what the experience was for me. So I ended up going back to school, learning about this. And that's when I actually was like and I went back to therapy as well. That was a big thing. I went back and I said, I found a therapist that I connected with, and I really started doing the work. I started talking about the things that I felt like I couldn't share. I started giving myself the chance to really hear my therapist share insights and tools with me. And I really started, I committed to it. I said, I'm not going to give up on doing this work, because I know if I do, then I'm going to go back to being stuck. I'm going to go back to being scared and isolated and alone. So it was very hard. It was really hard. But I knew if I had not done that, I would not be talking to you right now. I would not know you. I would not know any of the incredible people that I've had the honor to connect with, because I would have never published my book. I would have never started my podcast, and I would have never gotten into speaking or becoming a speaker, because I would have been so afraid to do that. So it really, all of it starts with me. We're the foundation. And that's what I did. I let myself have that opportunity. So going back there, I felt, excited and hopeful, but I realized I didn't give myself that same chance that I was trying to give the people that I was serving and working with. I didn't give myself that opportunity.
Really interesting that you found out that you needed help when you were giving others the help that they needed. So when it comes to mental health, the internal battle with self-stigma, it can be so heavy. So how did you start to break free? I guess, what would you say to someone who's currently feeling stuck in that same kind of struggle?
Yeah. So what I would say to someone who's stuck in that struggle is that it's not going to feel like this forever, and your feelings are valid. Also start with that, like, what you're feeling is valid. Don't think what you're feeling. Cause I feel like at least me, speaking for myself, I tend to do this where I invalidate my own experiences. I invalidate my traumas. I say things like, it could have been worse. I could have been killed. It could have been this. It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that big of a deal. So I realized, that's a form of, me emotionally abusing myself, right? Putting myself down, telling myself, just push past it, it'll be fine, ignore it, right? And sometimes people who don't have as much insight or education around mental health, they might say those same things to other people who are living with a mental illness, because maybe they haven't had those experiences, and they can't understand why somebody is unable to get up, unable to get out of bed, unable to move forward, having thoughts of suicide or attempting to take their life. A lot of people don't realize or understand that. So they might say, okay, come on, like, what are you doing? Like, stop being so lazy, just snap out of it, control your life, all these things. But they're neglecting to allow that person the space and the opportunity to really heal what is causing that in the first place. What is making them feel these things in the first place? And oftentimes it doesn't always have to be a major big life event or traumatic experience, because I know that was the case for me. But I've also interviewed over 215 people on my podcast, and a lot of them have such different experiences. And I've had some tell me, hey, I haven't had a big life trauma or anything similarly to what you've shared in the same way, but they've had their own experiences, but it's still traumatic, right? And I feel like that's also a form of saying, hey, I don't have, or again, like comparing, right? My stuff isn't as bad as your stuff, so why am I like this, right? But I think that's really, to answer your question, that's kind of what it looked like for me, is this, for me, invalidating my own trauma. So what helped me get rid of the self-stigma? It started with these 3 foundational pillars. So I talk about it. So in my book, I talk about it, but on the cover, I have these 3 doors. So this was obviously, right, the patient, provider, advocate, but I talk about forming relationships, purpose, and community. And those 3 things have helped me combat when these things arise, right? When I start to feel fear, when I start to feel like I'm alone, when I start to feel like I don't have a reason to be here anymore, I go back to those core things. So it's the relationship that I have with myself. So I've worked so much on especially these last 6 years, getting clear on my habits, what I'm doing with my time, what are my negative thoughts, what are my relationships, right? With my husband now, who we've been married for a year. We actually met 6 years ago. So I met him right when I was newly committed to doing that work. But previous to that, I had a lot of abusive relationships. I was in a lot of relationships where I wasn't supported. I wasn't able to move forward. I was really not in a good place with that. So a lot of these foundational pieces have helped me eliminate that self-stigma, but still it does resurface at times if I stop doing the work, right? So it doesn't go away forever, but it helps me eliminate it enough to where I am able to speak on stages and help people in the community and have these conversations openly. And I don't have this fear anymore when I'm around a group of people I don't know. Like I used to, I'd be so scared. I would be like, I can't tell them I have bipolar. Like they're going to judge me. But now I'm like, this is what I do for a living. It's helping people. It's making a difference. And I don't hold it I don't take it personally anymore if I do get people who react negatively, because again, I don't know their experience. I don't know their life. They might have had a loved one who they lost to, living with bipolar, and seeing me being so open and sharing could be difficult and triggering for them. So I don't hold things personally anymore. I just know that I have released that, because I know it's saved my life, and it's helped me help other people get on that path of what do I need to do to really make my mental health a priority.
So let's talk more about your podcast, Live Well Bipolar. Now, your memoir, Crooked Illness. They've obviously made a huge impact and will continue to do so. But let's get very real. Putting your story out there for everyone to see and hear, it must have been tough. When we look at the hard parts, what was the hardest part of being that open? And how did that process of sharing, how did that help you heal and grow?
Yes. So the hardest part for me with being open was a lot of that fear, right, that came to the surface. So when you're doing anything new, especially like this, right, I'm sharing my life. This is my real life and my experiences. This isn't, a fiction or, a story that I created. This is my experiences. So it's a lot to do that, because you have to be vulnerable, right? And a lot of us, vulnerability can be uncomfortable. We can see it as a weakness. We can see it as something that's not good. But I have shifted my view of vulnerability to be basically the gateway to healing and helping and opportunity. Because if we're not able to get vulnerable and talk about the real things and get underneath the hood of what we've gone through, then it's going to follow us, and it's going to stay with us, and it's going to come out in ways that we might not understand all the time. And that's what I realized later in my life is, through starting the podcast, I had a lot of fear, right? I was like, who am I to start a podcast? I don't know what I'm doing. I've never done this before. I've never interviewed people. I don't even know how to have conversations like this, but I learned, right? And just like anything in life, you jump in, you start before you're ready, but you have a reason why. You have a purpose, you have a driver. And my message and my driver was, I need to get over this fear, because if I don't, I'm never going to be able to help people. I'm never going to be able to have the impact, because it's going to silence me, and it could lead to, who knows where that could go for me. So that's what I did. I started before I was ready. I, slowly started with what I was comfortable with. And over the years, I've been able to really let go of that, because I know that this is what has allowed me to, it's the impact of what I hear from people, whether it's an email, whether it's a text message, whether it's a voice note or a DM or whatever the mode of communication, it's hearing from another human being who is reaching out to me and saying, because I listened to your podcast, or because I read your book, or because I saw you speak, you have helped me feel like I can reach out for help. You've helped me see that I can better show up for my son or my daughter or my partner. It's things like that. It's really just me considering, who am I actually hurting by keeping what I know locked away inside of me?
Mm-hmm. We talk a lot about stigma and how damaging it can be. So, in your opinion, what's the one thing? This will be my last question for you today. What is the one thing that we as a society need to change to make life easier and more supportive for people living with bipolar and all of the other mental health issues? What's the one thing we can do?
Yes. So I think the one thing that we can do collectively is to just educate ourselves more on this, right? And really just, listen and, listen to understand, not to respond or have a reaction or do something, right? Just educate yourself on these topics, talk to people that who are living with mental illness. Reach out to them and say, I want to learn more from you. I want to check, and check in on your friends, right? Check in on those that you love, see how they're doing. It doesn't always have to be, an event or occasion to why you're reaching out. But I would say really fundamentally, it starts with education and listening. So educating yourself, right? Listening to podcasts like mine, podcasts like yours, reading books like mine, putting yourself out there and, saying, I want to learn from those who have this lived experience so I can show up better for myself. And also it's knowing that we're not perfect, right? We're not perfect. We're never going to have all the answers, but there's people out there who have the answers that we've been seeking and we've been searching for. So it's just not being afraid of putting ourselves out there and asking those hard questions and saying, can you tell me more about your experiences? How can I better support you? Or what has made a difference for you? And really just going online, looking up articles, going to the library, researching books, and just doing the work, right? Because I know there's still things I don't know. There's still plenty of things I don't know, but when I don't know them, I reach out and I connect with people who have those experiences. So that's what I would say to your audience, and that we can all do collectively to really change the narrative around mental health and mental illness and help eliminate that stigma, is educating ourselves on the topic and being open to listening and hearing about people's experiences instead of judging and jumping to, you are just, the things that we hear, right, about mental illness. You're lazy, you don't want to move forward, you're a negative, just whatever the things that we throw out there. Just being willing to do the research, do the work, and have an open heart. And that's what I would say, really centered around education. And that's something we can all do, right, together.
Mm-hmm. And you make a very good point. There's hearing something, or there's listening to something. And so when we listen to learn as opposed to listen to respond, that's where it's at. Thank you so much. I've so enjoyed our conversation, Paris. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for helping all of us become a bit more aware now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. This was amazing. I loved talking with you and getting into these topics, and it's such a blessing to be able to do this work. So I'm super appreciative of you as well and what you guys are doing to put out stories like this. So I can't wait to continue the conversation and keep doing this work alongside you.
Absolutely.